Many times on this podcast, I've spoken about the misconception that all we do is work with bodies here. And I've told you several times how we work actually a lot with the mind. In fact, that pretty much dictates all that we do. And mindset is one of the four aspects. In fact, it's the most significant aspect that controls your ability, which actually controls deterioration. But did you know that it goes further than that? Did you know that there are actually certain types of exercises that are recommended, highly recommended as treatment for diseases of the brain? Now, the one of the most common, of course, is using boxing training for working with Parkinson's. But did you know that it's actually been recommended for other mental diseases? And do you know the difference in working with an exercise physiologist that has such training? We're going to cover that today on the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast.
Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
Good day and welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. My name is Garrett Williamson. I'm president of Personal Edge Fitness. Thank you so much for joining us today and the host of the podcast, obviously. I'm dying to dive into this subject, so much so that I had difficulty actually doing the intro because there's so much I'm trying to pack into the intro to tell you that I'm going to talk about, because we're not just going to talk about boxing from Parkinson's, which is something you may have heard about, but we're going to go even deeper into that and show you the difference in working with somebody that just knows something about holding mitts up in front of your face and having you punch their hands, and actually working with an exercise physiologist that has also that type of training. We're going to get into that in just a second, but let me tell you how to get in touch with the show. If you're interested in this show or any questions about this show, or you have any questions for Katie, which we have a segment coming up in a week or so, her box is almost stuffed full, so we're going to have to get onto that pretty quickly, and that's going to come up, like I say, within a week or so. But if you have any questions for Katie, you can contact us at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. You can also reach out to me at Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. That's, of course, my email address. It's also our website, personaledgefitness.com, and our Facebook page. Hit me up on Twitter at TeamPE if you so choose. Now, if you follow exercise at all, especially exercise and treatment of disease, you would have had to be living under a rock for the last, 15, 20 years to not hear about the benefits of boxing and Parkinson's. Now, this started some time ago with a prosecutor who used boxing for training, and he started developing early onset of Parkinson's, and he realized his boxing training seemed to be helping with it. And so they actually started doing studies on this. As a famous facility that actually started doing a lot of boxing for Parkinson's patients. And then neurologists started getting in on the studies and finding connections to the benefits of Parkinson's, of boxing for Parkinson's. And you may think that's contraindicated because of what you've heard about Parkinson's being tied to boxing. And I want to get into that in just a second. But let's start off with, if you don't know, what is Parkinson's? Actually, I'm going to read this. I want to make sure I get this correct because it has to do with dopamine. But Parkinson's is caused by a chronic deficiency in dopamine, which triggers increasing muscle stiffness, tremors, difficulties with speaking, fatigue, dizziness, and loss of coordination and balance. Now, what happens is that patients' movements often get very slow and small. Sometimes they have erratic movements. Falling is a big concern. Now, that's your technical definition, but let me break it down a little bit more for you. Dopamine is basically a neurotransmitter. It is produced in the brain, in the hypothalamus. So if you've heard me talk about balance, it's one of my favorite issues, coming from a background in gymnastics and coaching gymnastics for years, understanding what balance actually is and what is occurring with balance and how to work on balance. When you work on balance, it's not just doing exercises where you're standing on your foot and holding one leg in the air, you're walking a balance beam. This is typically what I call weekend certified personal trainers know about balance. They look at the physical part of it. Balance is not located in the physical. Very little of it is. If you have a weakness, yes, that can affect your balance, but balance starts primarily in the brain. If you get that part under control, then you've got probably about 90% of your balance issues solved. But it starts in the brain. It starts in the brain two different ways, I say. It starts literally in the brain, scientifically in the brain, in the fact that the neural pathways in the cerebellum, as we stop activities, as our lifestyle changes and we stop doing activities. Now, careful. This is not associated with time passing on a calendar. It happens because we stop doing these activities. As I've said before when I talk about balance, when you start off as a toddler, your neural pathways in your brain are basically like a dirt road, but you're encouraged to stimulate, to wear them down, to start making those paths cleaner. You're encouraged to walk, do the old, come on, come walk to daddy, walk to daddy. You're encouraged to use those neural pathways. And so they they go from that dirt road, I love using the road analogy, to a 2-lane highway, to a 4-lane highway, to an 8-lane super highway when you're 18, 17, 18, or whatever. Again, time doesn't have anything to do with this. It has to do with how much your activity you're doing, how much tag you're playing, how many sports you're playing, how many times you're challenging your balance. That 8-lane superhighway can come at 8 years old for a male or female gymnast. And then as you stop doing those activities that develop that highway, well, the grass starts to grow over again, and you actually make it go back down to the dirt road. Now, and I'm sorry I didn't want to talk about balance today, but this is what makes me so mad about people associating balance with age. And any idiot health professional that's telling you that balance has to do with age, I'm telling you, they're lying to you. Garrett Williamson called them a liar. It has nothing to do with time passing on a calendar. It has everything to do with activity. And the reason I beat that up so much is the fact that's what creates fear. And fear is the second part. It's not a direct relation. It's something we develop, and we start developing fear of it, and that happens, of course, in the brain. And that's another way that your brain controls your balance. So if anybody's telling you you can't do anything about it because you have a certain number on the calendar, they're lying to you. They're creating fear in your brain. So I'm sorry, I got way off topic there. But going back to those neurotransmitters and back to what I was talking about with Parkinson's, well, dopamine is a neurotransmitter, and you start affecting that, you're obviously going to start affecting movements in the body and definitely balance. Now, it's not the only thing that boxing has been shown to help, and I'll get into how boxing actually helps with that in just a minute. But if you think about it, if you can aid processes in the brain, aid any kind of neurotransmission, well, that's not going to be just Parkinson's that is affected. Neurotransmission not only has to do with physical movement, it also has to do with thoughts in your brain, memory. It has to do with anything that goes on. Neurotransmitters control everything that goes on in your brain. So if you have a thought about, remembering somebody's name, that's part of a neurotransmission. Working a complex math quiz or whatever, well, that's neurotransmission. So anything that the brain controls, anytime you help neurotransmission, you're going to help that activity, whatever you may be working on or what have you. Or the point I'm really trying to get to is not only can you help slow the effects of Parkinson's through aiding neurotransmission, aiding the dopamine process, but also stroke victims, dementia. They've actually started doing studies now on boxing training for dementia, and we're seeing the benefits of that. I was speaking in a former podcast, and I forget which one it was. I was talking about the fact that I believe many health professionals, I've never actually talked to one about this particular activity, but because I hear it from clients that are talking about time passing on a calendar and they want to keep their brain active, so they read a lot, or they play trivia games, or they'll do crosswords, and that is very prevalent. That's been prevalent for years in my senior clientele. I don't know, I've never asked them who actually told you that. A lot of times they've read an article about that. And I'm not against all those things, but you know that exercise takes that benefit that you're getting from doing trivia or crossword puzzles, and it's like 10x. It's a lot higher, the benefit that you get in your brain and neurotransmission from exercise than you do from those other activities. But they'll do these things for dementia. They'll do these things for stroke patients. Well, this is where exercise, and particularly boxing training, actually helps retard that, helps hold it back, and can actually improve those situations. How? What does boxing do? Why is boxing so significant? Why am I talking about that particular exercise? And you may believe that it's contraindicated, like I said at the very beginning, because you've heard of boxers, in particular Muhammad Ali, who developed Parkinson's due to boxing. And that is true. What we're talking about is we're not talking about getting hit in the head. Now, that is what, and I haven't read the studies on this. I don't know if they're conclusive or not, but that is what is at least believed caused Muhammad Ali's Parkinson's. And you may be looking at this going, of course, Garrett, they've proved it. And I'm quite certain they have. But it was the hits to the head that actually caused his Parkinson's. And they've talked about this with multiple concussions in football athletes. And of course, not just Muhammad Ali as far as boxers, other boxers too. We're not talking about hitting the head. We're not even talking about hitting the head with head protection on. There's no contact to the head whatsoever, definitely with the client, and believe it or not, with the instructor also. We don't allow the instructors to get hit either. We're talking about mitt work. Now, mitt work is, and I've got, if you're watching on social media, if you see my hands are up in front in the kind of the stop motion with my hands. And that's actually the position I'm in when I'm doing mitt work with a client. I have these heavy, real thick mitts that go on my hand, and the client is wearing, their wrists are wrapped and their knuckles are wrapped first, and then there's heavy boxing gloves put on over that. Very padded is what I mean. Not really heavy, but just very, very, very padded. They're actually hitting mitts. Now, how does boxing benefit the brain? That's where I was going to. Well, a few things things are going on. First thing has to do with the stance. There's a 1 foot forward, 1 foot back stance, and it's actually a little bit wider stance. And most people think that you're standing with your feet apart, like as in a straddle. And that's actually a very unstable position. You're standing 1 foot in front of the other, but they're not in line with each other. They're just off center. So if you're watching on social media, you wouldn't stand with your right foot basically pointing directly behind your left heel if your left foot is forward. It would be off to the side a little bit to give yourself a little bit of a wider base. That's where it starts. It starts with creating that base. That is a very balanced and very controlled state, and your brain is making that happen. Your brain is being taught this is a very stable state. When you go to throw the combinations, a couple of things are happening. First thing that's happening is you're shifting your weight. So you go from that balanced base, and then you go to shifting your weight. You shift your weight, and believe it or not, if you've never done any boxing training before, you're actually doing something opposite of the way that is natural. When we walk, which is a natural movement, of course, we walk left arm, right leg, right arm, left leg. So when your right leg goes forward, your left arm goes forward. When your left leg goes forward, your right arm goes forward. In boxing, it's just the opposite. When you throw your right hand, all your weight goes on your right leg. When you throw your left hand, all your weight goes on your left leg. Now, that may seem, oh, that's natural, that's normal. Try it. You'd be surprised at how many times you get thrown off on, especially if you're left-handed and you're throwing that, what we call the number 2 punch, the cross punch. That's the most challenging one to get. And you actually shift your weight to what is your quote-unquote back leg. So back to what we were talking about as far as the training of the brain, by shifting that weight back and forth, you are challenging your balance. And you're challenging your balance on a, pardon me for saying it this way, but a diseased brain if you're working with Parkinson's. So think about swinging 2 bats on an on-deck circle if you're a baseball player. When you drop that second bat and you go up to the plate, man, you feel like a Superman or Superwoman because it's so much lighter, you're holding only 1 bat. Well, challenging that brain to do that extra work of shifting back and forth when throwing those hands or whatever. It's like swinging 2 bats on the on-deck circle. You go to walk without doing that challenge, well, now normal walking is easier. And this is what actually affects your balance and strengthens, let's call it that way. If I were to have a balance muscle in the brain, it actually strengthens the balance muscle. There's something else going on. This is not talked about very often, but if you're throwing combinations, which a good instructor that really knows boxing, first thing knows exercise physiology, knows kinesiology, which is a study of movement, then on top of that, you lay on top of it actual understanding boxing training, well, they're going to be calling out combinations, and they're going to be watching and seeing how you shift your weight. Now, somebody that's done a boxing class that knows nothing about movement is not going to understand this. They're going to understand putting their hands up in front of you, and you just kind of playing patty cake with them. Somebody that's a kinesiologist, understands the study of movement, is going to be able to see that shifting of the weight and see whether or not you're actually shifting the weight right way. Also, using those different combinations, calling out a 1, 2, 3, a 1, 2, 3, 4, you're having to use your brain. You're having to use your brain to understand what's a 1. What's a 2? What's a 3? The 1 typically is the jab. The number 2 is what we call the cross. Number 3 would be a hook shot. If you're right-handed, the 1 is a left-hand jab. Number 2 is a right-hand cross. Number 3 is a left-hand hook. Now, if you're right-handed, if you're left-handed, it's just the opposite. What's going on in the brain is, okay, the brain says, okay, wait quickly, the 1 is the jab. Okay, it's the jab. Remember how to do the jab movement. Now I've got to put it into play. Where does my weight shift? And which arm do I throw forward? How do I turn the body? Where do I shift the weight? All of that is going on at the brain at the same time. It is exercising the brain. It is increasing those neurotransmissions, increasing that production of dopamine, and starting to combat the effects of Parkinson's, combat the effects of dementia, combat the effects of stroke, believe it or not. We use it with our stroke patients. It's also a fun exercise. And I'll tell you, there's some studies that there's been quite a few studies that have been done on this. Rebecca Martin, who's a professor of physical therapy at Hanover College, is the one that basically came out and said that you're basically combating fears with falling. I mean, that's one of the biggest problems that what I was saying earlier about attributing age to falling is going to create fear. And she says one of the biggest factors in whether or not someone is at risk for falling is they're fearful of falling. And they've shown in studies where doing this kind of training, you're pushing yourself off balance. And so you're learning to control balance. Not only do you start to build these abilities to be able to throw the jab, throw the cross, understand the combination, shift the weight back and forth, but what is happening there is you're building your confidence. probably one of the largest challenges I have in working with somebody that has already created balance issues is first and foremost dealing with their fear. If you're one of my clients and you've worked with me on balance, you've heard me say this before. If I could take your conscious brain out of the way and just work with your subconscious, we can knock this balance problem out and no problem whatsoever, because that's just repetition. But understanding that you're going to be okay, that you're not going to fall, working on that confidence, that's a huge part of controlling balance. And it's also why, and pardon me for doing it, while I went off at the beginning of this podcast about my anger associated with people telling people of a certain age that, well, your number on your calendar is why you're falling. That is creating fear. That is chipping away at a problem that already exists. You're sitting there making it worse by developing fear. Well, boxing, of course, it's been shown, deals with building that confidence and conquering that fear. Now, I keep saying also about why it's so important to work with somebody that has a background in exercise physiology and kinesiology. As you well know, all of my staff members possess at minimum a bachelor's degree in either exercise physiology, kinesiology, sport medicine, athletic training, or exercise science. The difference in that, and I've seen this, is because this has become so popular, there are people that are doing boxing training, quote unquote, for Parkinson's, and they're doing nothing more than simple mitt work without understanding movements, without understanding what's going on in the brain, without understanding how the body moves, how to shift the weight, how to be able to pick up on those differences, how to be able to pick up whether or not somebody's actually shifting their weight. Are they moving the right way? Are they throwing their weight to the right leg when they're throwing a right hand? Watching their eyes, being able to understand these movements. That takes a background in kinesiology to understand that. And I hate to tell you this, in just a simple weekend certification, you're not going to get that. Not only that, but we've taken it a step further here. Understanding that movement is something we've done all our careers. I mean, balance is an integral part on what we learn. We take it a step further, and this actually started back in 1994 when I was introduced to boxing training. I didn't grow up doing boxing. I always thought it was really cool to watch somebody work a speed bag and work a heavy bag, understanding boxing, but it wasn't something I did in high school. I was actually introduced to it by a client in a boxing gym in New Orleans called the Neutral Corner back in 1994. There was an instructor, an Australian instructor named Jono. Jono was a fantastic boxing instructor, and this was not a fitness for boxing instructor. This was a boxing instructor. In his facility, Riddick Bowe had trained there, HBO had filmed there. I mean, this was a boxing gym. And I went there to learn the mechanics of boxing, which are fascinating, incredibly fascinating. My wife and I would go down there once or twice a month and do a Saturday workout, just learning this technique. And it got so ingrained in what I do that when I opened up Personal Edge, I made sure that we had a speed bag. I made sure that we had a heavy bag, and I actually did mitt work with my clients. Some of them just thought it was fun. Others, I was doing it for working on the brain. And here at Personal Edge, both in Mobile and our Eastern Shore locations, we have speed bags and we do mitt work. So what we did now is, as I had my exercise physiologists, kinesiologists, sport medicine professionals joining, I knew they had a background in balance training. But on top of that, we started working with a facility out of Mandeville, Louisiana. Neutral Corner closed some years ago, so we found a wonderful facility, Innovative Boxing, out of Mandeville, Louisiana, which is run by Tori the Humble Beast Williams. This guy is amazing. First thing, he's a fantastic boxer. He's a WFC undefeated professional boxer, but also we were able to take his class, and we were sure we're going to work with some of his instructors. Well, Tori happened to be in there himself and took us through a fantastic workout, an incredible workout. So we actually go over there, and my staff, immediately afterwards, we went right next door to a fantastic Italian restaurant and sat and talked about the mechanics of what was going on, about the shifting of the weight and what have you. And that's a discussion that, of course, kinesiologists, exercise physiologists can have, and they get it. And so now all of my staff is able to do that same type of training. And we're going to, Tori, I know you're out there and I know you're listening to this. Don't worry, we're coming back. It was a fantastic workout. We've got some clients actually want to go back with us, but that's using the boxing training on top of our background in kinesiology and exercise physiology. I've had quite a few stroke patients that have been referred to us, Parkinson patients, and dementia patients that have been referred to us. And I realized that I'd never done a podcast to talk about how we can help that through the different training that we do, not just the exercise, not just HIIT training, but actually using boxing training, and that we are qualified to do that. So if you have any questions about that, if you know anybody that may be suffering from one of these diseases, it's very scary, and I understand that. Give us a call. We'd love to speak to you about that. You can reach out to me at area code 251-278-3343. That's 251-278-EDGE. Send me an email at Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. You can also reach out to us through our website, personaledgefitness.com, and our Facebook page. Need be, hit me up on Twitter at TeamPE. Using boxing for fitness and mental challenges, mental diseases, especially with an exercise physiologist, is just one more way we help you reach your level of wellness. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.